Okay, welcome to the June 26, 2014 Murfreesboro City Council meeting. Councilman Ron Washington has the prayer and the pledge.
Thank you, citizens. We're going to go to the Lord for a moment of silence, please. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Vice Mayor Young, if you'll take the chair, we've got a proclamation we want to present to the Wingate family.
Erase all his names. Screw up. Delete his agenda.
One of this one, David.
Did you get over here? Let's see this.
Come on around. There you go. You're fine. Council members, many of you know we lost a dedicated employee last month. Earlier this month. Mr. Wingate was a 17-year employee of our airport, and I thought it would be fitting that we present a proclamation tonight and to commemorate his service. So this is what we have for you tonight. Whereas Kenneth S. Wingate was married to Betty Lloyd for 60 years, son of the late R.A. and Frances Atwell Wingate, father of Kenneth E. Wingate, Karen Harper, Sharon Hart, and the proud grandfather of Amanda Harper, Austin Harper, Samantha Hart, brother of Murray Wingate, and whereas Kenneth was a native of Mecklenburg, North Carolina, a member of Smyrna First Presbyterian Church, retired from the United States Air Force, devoted 17 years of service to the City of Murfreesboro Municipal Airport, and whereas Kenneth was a veteran of the United States Air Force, where he served as a C-130 crew chief, serving in many locations, including service in Vietnam. Following his military career, he worked with Lockheed, where he was stationed in Saudi Arabia, where he moved his entire family. Whereas Kenneth also worked for the City of Murfreesboro at the Municipal Airport for 17 years. The majority of those years, he was the airport secretary. There, he did an excellent job accurately maintaining the customer accounts and assisting pilots whenever possible. Kenneth also was well known for scheduling some airport cookouts and supplying these events with the vegetables that he grew in his own garden. He was well respected for his service, great work ethic, and accuracy. Now, therefore, I, Shane McFarland, Mayor of the City of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby proclaim June 26, 2014 as a day to honor Kenneth S. Wingate and urge all citizens to join in honoring him in this well-deserved recognition. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And would love if you would... I'd love if you would introduce the family.
Yes. I am Karen Harper. This is my sister Sharon Hart, her daughter Samantha, and this is my mom, Betty Wingate. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Ms. Wingate, we are very thankful for the time that Mr. Wingate was here at the city, and thank you for allowing him to be with us. We'll say that we have someone who's here, and I was told that this is the Melissa Wright of Brentwood, and I asked that if she was going through a renovation project like you're going through, Melissa.
Software, not renovation.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you again for coming. Thank you so much.
I believe all your stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Your copies and
Thank you again to the Wingate family for being here, and for Chad and your staff for being here as well. See Mr. Luzinski here. Thank you for coming. Would also like to make one other comment that I have a note on my desk that we have a very loyal Alabama fan who is celebrating a birthday today, Matthew Blomley. He's an Alabama fan, right, Matthew? Okay. Happy birthday, Matthew.
Same-o.
We'll move to the consent agenda and have a few things to add. That there are some on item A, the low bid results are attached, and also on your desk before you got here was on item C, the revised private utility crossing amendment that is also, of course, that's revised. So, does anyone have any questions on items of the consent agenda or want to have anything removed off?
Hearing none, Mayor, I move for adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
Mr. Gilly and Mr. Young. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Second readings. We'll hear from the planning director with regards to 308 Franklin Road.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Included with the agenda materials were 2 letters from me. I had prepared these for a previous council meeting when this was previously scheduled for second reading, and before that matter was deferred at the applicant's request. The information that I provided to you in the first letter was about the development potential for the property. Although the property is 0.77 acres, that's 33,922 square feet in size, it's irregular in shape, but it looks like that we could see a development of meet all of our development requirements of about a 10,000 square foot building with 34 parking spaces. That'd be a retail type use and meet our requirements for parking and landscaping. It appears that a 4,500 square foot restaurant with 96 seats and 49 parking spaces could be developed on the property and meet all requirements. It also indicates that with the location of the existing structure could easily be adapted into a commercial use because the structure's in the northwestern quadrant. It would not have a problem with getting to the rear of it for using the back part for parking. So that indicates the development potential and meet all of our requirements. The second letter involves looking into alcohol sales. It appears that this property would not be able to have liquor by the drink or a liquor retailer under our current regulations because of the separation requirements for schools and for churches. This property would not be able to meet our requirements for issuance of a license for either a liquor by the drink, a restaurant that would serve alcoholic beverages, or for a liquor store, as we call them, even if it were zoned commercial highway. I would add that beer is not precluded by these type of regulations. Beer is allowed in property immediately adjacent to or within these distance. There are other churches in our community that are directly adjacent to or within close proximity to uses that sell beer. The letter also investigates the sexually oriented businesses as defined by our zoning ordinance. They are restricted to be at least 1,000 feet from a church or a residential use. Our zoning ordinance would not allow the adult-oriented businesses as we define them in Section 32 of our zoning ordinance to be located on that property because it's immediately adjacent to the church property, and it would be precluded. I have discussed the property with Mr. Chris Bratcher. He is present tonight along with the owners of the property. They are here if you have any questions. He has indicated that they still have a willingness to discuss the possibility of restrictive covenants that would preclude particularly the beer or possibly some other uses that might be obnoxious adjacent to a church or a school. Some of them that I have discussed with him in general terms have been uses like a lingerie shop or a tattoo parlor or a head shop or something like that. Those seem to be incompatible with a school in particular or a church. So that's my report to you. My letters were included with your agenda materials on page 35. If you have questions, I'm available. Mr. Bratcher's available along with the owners.
Mr. Gilly?
Mr. Bratcher would mind coming up.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Chris Bratcher, commercial real estate broker at Red Realty. if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I will report on to you what I've done, and I appreciate you allowing me to defer this until I had a chance to meet with Pastor Norris at the Franklin Road Baptist Church. We did have a really good meeting, probably an hour and a half or so, and we talked in depth about a lot of different things. Pastor Norris informed me that he was going out of the country the next day, and he would be gone for approximately 10 days, and there may be somebody here that may want to clarify that if I've misspoken that, but he indicated that he had some interest in the property, and we were talking about the potential use of the Franklin Road for this property. The owners are here, Marcia and Sherry Richardson, the owners of the property, the heirs, and I have spoken with them, and we know that sometimes zonings change and sometimes elected officials change. And talking with the restrictions for as beer goes, the property owners have agreed, and they would voluntarily put a deed restriction on this property where there would be no beer sales, and that would go forever with the property, no matter who owns the property. The property owners have told me that they want to be good neighbors to the church. They were there prior to the church being built, and Mr. and Miss Richardson, the ones, they're deceased, but they were always great neighbors with the church, and the church were always great neighbors with them. And they appreciated the relationship they've had. They're deceased, and their heirs are just wishing to sell the property this time.
In your discussions with Pastor Norris, were there other uses or things that could be allowed that he had concern with that you all discussed?
We did not discuss any other usage. I think the main thing was beer, and we understand that, and we're like I said, and the owners understand that. We've talked to a couple interested clients for this property, and I'll tell you, neither one of them had any indication of doing that. So one was for a daycare and one's for a florist. So I don't anticipate that ever coming up, but we're willing to put deed restrictions on the property if that would ease some concerns.
Would you be able to have that prepared and ready to be recorded before the third reading? I think that would be the concern that some of us might have.
Yes, we could have that done before a third and final reading.
We won't meet next week.
Last week we saw something very similar to this come before us, where there was a situation where we thought maybe there should be restrictions in place, and we saw those restrictions before we voted on it. Without a restrictive covenant in place, I don't see how we can approve this. I'm not sure that it's appropriate zoning for it to begin with, in my own opinion, but that's here nor there. If something that would be more appropriate, and a business office or something that would be probably more conducive to be next to a school and more of a buffer for a church. Property's currently completely surrounded by church property, it appears. The property surrounding this property appears to be all county property. So with the current situation that we have with annexation and everything that's going on with the state and what's going on in the city of Murfreesboro, I'm just not sure that this is the appropriate time to even be doing the annexation of it, because if we were annexing the entire area, maybe, but to go out there and grab an island like this is probably inappropriate as well. So I'll certainly be voting against it.
I'll let Mr. Alott comment on the zoning and the annexation and that kind of stuff. So,
Question for Joseph.
Mr. Lance?
Joseph.
Okay.
Joseph, is when we get a situation like this, and forgive me for not being experienced in some of this stuff, but when we get a situation like this, is it appropriate to have this kind of go back through the Planning Commission? I mean, or do we? I mean, when something comes up that we feel like is new since that was done, perhaps whether it be these things that we've brought up or the annexation laws, I mean, is it appropriate to think, or is that possible?
The Planning Commission is charged with studying matters of zoning and making recommendations to council. The application was for commercial highway zoning. That was what was requested. If the council would like for the Planning Commission to study something different or to study a different matter of annexation, certainly it would be appropriate to defer it back to the Planning Commission for that purpose. If the only thing that's changing is the matter of restrictive covenants, I feel a little bit uncertain that that would be an appropriate reason to send it back to the Planning Commission. If we were looking at a different zoning classification, I think that would be a very appropriate reason to send it back to the Planning Commission.
I don't know everything that is all the lists that are listed under the different possible zonings, but I wonder if it might not be more appropriate to have a different zoning. And I don't, again, if we can handle this by zoning it commercial fringe instead of commercial highway, and that pretty much takes out all these things. We don't have to sit here and try to pick out every little business that we think might be have a negative impact on the church or might not be appropriate, what we think is appropriate to be next to the church. Is there a zoning that would achieve that?
The next more restrictive commercial zoning would be commercial fringe. Commercial fringe also allows restaurants, but it has the same exact alcohol restrictions that a commercial highway has. So that would be no change.
What about the other things, the head shops,
They're pretty much identified as general retail. They are, but the pawn shops are something that may be a different use. I would need to study my zone orders for a moment to give an exact answer on that. But I'm thinking that a pawn shop, I'd best wait and examine my zone orders before I offer an opinion on that.
My preference would be to see these things before voting on it when we only have a third reading left. That means if we're sitting here again 2 weeks from now and we haven't had time to hash this out. I mean, it's time for a third reading, and that's all we got. So my, to defer it or something like that would be, I guess, my preference until we see, look, this is what we're going to do. I mean, my own opinion on it would be that I'd like to see the applicant be proactive on this and have this stuff listed out already to say, hey, look, we think these are things, we want to be a good neighbor. I hear all that, but it's been a couple of weeks since we've known about this, and I guess I was hoping that we'd have this stuff in front of us where we go, hey, look, this is out, this is out, this is out, this is out, this is out. That's what I think I'd need.
And if it were, Rick, I agree with you somewhat. If it was a planned unit development or something where we could actually see a restaurant with a plan like we did last week, I think that might be a completely different situation. But I'm trying to sit here and think of an example of a nice sit-down restaurant in Murfreesboro that really doesn't sell mixed drinks. Most all of them do. So I'm just not sure that there's much of a market out there for what that would be, assuming might be wanting to locate there. Also, right next to this property, there is another residence. Is that a part of the church, or is that still a single-family resident?
It is owned by the church.
Okay.
Mr. Bratcher, could you bring us a list of along with the input from the owner of some things that would be not appropriate for this, and bring that back to us?
We could do that, and you could do that as well if you want to, Councilman or Vice Mayor, that I don't know what you think is inappropriate. If you want to make the list, we'll be glad to look at that, and we can make a list. We'll be glad to do either one you want us to.
I think when it comes to matter of restrictive covenants, since those are voluntary and we cannot make you do those, I think the list needs to come from the applicant. Is that right, Ms. McGannon, as opposed to coming from us back to you?
Okay.
I believe that's correct.
I think the council needs to be careful because contract zoning for this kind of bulk zoning would be inappropriate. And similarly, I think it would be appropriate if the council believes it wishes to defer for any reason, such as to consider whether bulk zoning, be it commercial highway or commercial fringe, is appropriate, or whether it believes that a planned development zoning would be appropriate. If it wishes to defer for some reason, I suggest, and Mr. Adelot can help us with the timelines, that it gets the applicant's representative's consent to such deferral, so we ensure that we give a timely response to the request for the rezoning. And we are talking about the rezoning, even though the first issue, is annexation, but we need to be careful of respecting the up or down. If the council has reached a decision that it doesn't feel this type of zoning is appropriate, you can vote it down, but you do need to give an answer in a timely fashion or get the applicant's consent to some delay while you explore and the applicant considers what their options are.
We will be glad to get you a list of what we feel like would be maybe, and I'll be glad to meet with Pastor Norris again, and we can work on that list together, and I'll work with the property owners and see if they're in agreement with it, and we can come back if you want to defer that, if that's the wishes of the council.
Consent to deferral?
Is it okay if we defer this for a week?
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Because of the holiday.
Ms. McGannon, my question would be, and certainly I'm just speaking for myself, but if I feel the zoning request is inappropriate at CH and it's too aggressive a zoning, I mean, it's the most aggressive zoning that we have, in my opinion. If it's the inappropriate zoning, would we not be better off just to vote down the CH or vote up the CH? And
if you took a vote to vote it down, that would be very clear instructions to the applicant that it was unacceptable, as opposed to going back and forth with various covenants that might get into discussion of specific uses that would be sort of bargain zoning, which is inappropriate. Right. So you might wish to vote against deferral in order to have a vote up or down on the CH. You have options.
And I guess my opinion is there's certainly plenty of zoning restrictions that we could apply to this property that would certainly give them the avenues to develop it, but something that would be more appropriate for the location. And I'm just afraid it's a bad precedent to set for us to go ahead and do it commercial highway and then start asking the applicant, will you go ahead and do these restrictions on it? And I mean, I asked for restrictive covenants the very first time he came before us, and of course I voted no on it the first time because there were none. Here we are back looking at the same deal, and we still have no restrictive covenants on it, and we're still looking at commercial highway. And so I'm just of the opinion that if we're going to cherry pick everything out to change it to a different zoning anyways, once we get done, then we're better off to send it back to the Planning Commission or to turn this down as a commercial highway project and let it go back to the Planning Commission and see if they can come up with something that might be more appropriate or something that we, as the council, might agree on, if there's others who feel as I do.
Now, we've passed this on the first reading.
Yes, sir.
So we've already had a public hearing.
Yes, sir.
And we passed it on the first reading.
Mm-hmm.
And the council has the option to come back and do many things that you said, such as sending it back to the Planning Commission or downzoning it, if we wanted to take it to commercial local.
The council could move to amend the ordinance that is before it on zoning to change it to a commercial fringe, commercial local. You could do that. You could vote it down. You could sending it back to the Planning Commission in the absence of a real question as to which they needed clarity. I think that's really sort of more appropriate when you have a planned development where there might be some ambiguity or options that had come up.
May I make the suggestion that we do defer this and let the applicant make his list, and but generally deed restrictions, this is not unusual to pass it on a first reading. The deed restrictions come in, everybody agrees on them, and then the third reading they become an effect. So this is not, we're not reinventing the wheel.
No, we've certainly done that before. It's been more common with planned development or entire subdivisions than it is with an individual lot and with the type of exclusions that are being talked about. The example of I don't have to look at my zoning ordinance as well, but the concern about alcohol because of the proximity of the church is a little bit different. The kinds of covenants we've sought have been more when we've had commonly owned property. We wanted to make sure there was a homeowners association that could be enforced for its maintenance purposes. You've certainly done it, but again, the council cannot require covenants as a condition of zoning, and the city cannot enforce covenants after zoning has occurred. So, they are intended to be for private purposes.
But the church could enforce those or request enforcement of those.
Yes, it depends how the covenants would be drafted, but in the same way as you had an offer from the applicants at your last meeting to have the adjacent property owners have enforcement rights, even though they did not have common ownership. Generally, covenants have originated when a developer puts them down so that everybody in the subdivision will have the same right of enforcement. But you start out with common ownership. The Indian Hills proposal was a little bit different, considerably different actually, because you had property owners who had separately owned property who were being given rights of enforcement on the parcel in question.
Ms. McGannon, on the way the agenda is listed, we have to make a decision on the annexation first.
You certainly have the ability to defer both. If the question that I posed to the applicant's representative was about zoning, I think it would be well to confirm that
Okay.
is also applicable to annexation. So you could keep them paired as we generally do, or you could consider them separately and proceed with the annexation and delay on the zoning.
One of the things we don't want to happen, as it's happened out in the a little further out on the Franklin Road, where you have old houses or houses that have become businesses in the county. And that's why I think we should annex it and then defer the zoning. Now, we can do that next week also, or 2 weeks from now, but
What about the applicant? I mean, what would be your thoughts on the separating the annexation versus and if we deferred, would you prefer us to defer both?
I think it would probably be the wishes, and I can't speak for the applicant. They're here. I'm just a representative as a real estate agent, but I don't think it would matter. But we would probably prefer to keep them both on the same track.
And it would almost be inappropriate for us to annex one residential house into the city. I mean, that's kind of piecemeal annexation is the way I'm looking at it. I mean, generally we'll annex an area or we'll annex a larger, we're talking about 0.77 acre. I mean,
Mr. Smother, generally, the city has tried to just do what property owners wish. Often it's been with larger tracts. As you know, the General Assembly has changed the law about annexation, and so I think we're going to be seeing more of individual lot annexations. So we've done it in the past. I think we'll be doing it more in the future. So I respectfully suggest that as a policy matter, would not necessarily be a reason to not annex.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, you've asked, y'all have asked for her opinion. I can't give it, so if you wouldn't mind, if you allow her to speak on that behalf, that would be great.
If you don't mind stating your name, that'd be great.
Marcella Richardson. I'm the executor of my mother's estate. I would like to respectfully ask the council to go ahead and consider our annexation. Our hands are sort of tied here. My mother's been passed away since February 14th, 2 years ago, and we would like to go ahead and start the procedure. We did have a contract with Franklin Road, and now they decided not to act on that contract, sir. So that saddened me. My mother took a lot of comfort in the fact that we had sold the property to the church, or she had, and now that they've decided not to go ahead and act on that. I have nothing else I can do but go ahead and try to get the property ready to sell. And that's part of the process I started with Mr. Bratcher. And I've spoken with Pastor Norris, and we've been good neighbors to the church. We're certainly not trying to put any kind of bad business or anything there, or anything to harm the church, And I would like to go ahead and go forward with this. This has gone on, I've been told, and I do need to go ahead and start, go on with this. I'd like for it to be considered. I don't know what to do here. I told Mr. Bratcher that we agreed to the restrictions. I mean, they're already in place before we ever came up here about the feet from the church to my parents' land and everything. That's a moot point, sir. I'd just like to go ahead and go on, and it's not piecemeal annexation either, because the land across the street from the 0.77 acres is in the city limits. So I'm not asking for piecemeal annexation. That's just not true.
Well, I guess, council members, hearing from the applicant, we would want to consider the annexation portion first.
So you specifically mentioned annexation to move forward with that. You want us to
I'd like to go ahead and move forward with that.
also with the zoning request as well?
Well, I can wait and prepare a document about that, or go ahead and do that tonight. I just want to get the wheels turning on this, sir. It's not just me involved in this.
I think what I'm hearing from Ms. McGann is that we kind of need you to give us the direction which you rather us. It sounds like you want us to go ahead and listen or make the decision on the annexation tonight, and about the zoning, you want us to go ahead and make the decision tonight, or do you want us to defer that for 2 weeks, and then you can get your information together for us for the zoning? Is that correct?
I think the suggestion was, should they choose to record some restrictive covenants, that would give time for that to be done and for the city to be informed about it. That can happen before second reading. That can happen before third reading.
Gotcha.
So it would be possible to go ahead, keep them together, and go ahead and act on both on second reading tonight, and then we'd have the natural 2-week break before third and final reading, or to split them. Either are options that you have.
I just want to give a quick comment that, and I think Ms. McGann knows I've probably preached this over the years. I don't like passing stuff on first reading, unless it's an economic development where we're doing a fast track deal with the state and that there's time sensitive things. But I hate passing things on first reading when we have questions to answer. That's just my opinion. I think that a lot of times it's better to defer something as opposed to pass it and then try to work on the questions later on down the road. But that's my opinion. Yes, Ms. Scales-Harris.
Because there's so many questions and unsolved answers, I would like to see us defer both.
Okay. Is that in the form of a motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Got a motion?
Until we get more information.
I don't know that we have her.
We will need to have 2 motions, one on the annexation and one on the zoning. And in terms of whether or not we need the applicant's consent, I need Mr. Adelot to tell me where we are timeline if he's looked at the file. Are we okay time-wise waiting until the 10th?
I'm going to be out of town all next week, so I won't be here to be able to do much. It's also going to be the week of 4th of July. There'll probably be a lot of other people on vacation at that time. Upon my return, I will actually, before I leave, I'll probably get with Mr. Bratcher to maybe get some starting points. If we deferred tonight on both the annexation and zoning, I think we could probably have a bullet list of, I probably think the property owner could have that in time to either have with your agenda materials for the July 10th meeting, or to have it handed out at the meeting or sometime between the agenda preparation and the meeting, so that you'd have something in hand. If that seemed to be in a format that council felt was appropriate, I think that they would be able to have they may need some time to have an attorney prepare the document and have it recorded, but they could have it done before third reading. And I could have, if there had to be another deferral, that just may be the case. sometimes these things take time. You have to get an attorney involved, and you have to get it recorded. Everybody has to be in agreement. So I think the timeline just laid out, July 10th, we could have a bullet point.
Ms. McGann, is it possible to defer something indefinitely until the applicant comes back, or can we table something?
That's actually what I was hoping Mr. Adot would tell me in terms of where we are for the timeline for the applicant's right to have a decision from the council.
I think since there were no holdups at the Planning Commission level, that we are still we have probably another 45 days in that timeline that we still have to spare.
Okay. Okay, so we will consider for passage on second reading ordinance 140823 to annex an area located along Old Fort Parkway, Franklin Road, and adopt for same a plan of services.
Shane, you've actually got a motion on the floor from Ms. Harrison that we probably need to vote on or let fail for a second.
Ms. Harris, if you don't mind
Go ahead.
taking your motion back, let me go back through that because I need to read through the legal guide, and then we can have a motion on that. Correct, Ms. McGann?
I think you called the item up,
Okay.
so it would be timely now if Ms. Gales Harris wishes to make a motion to defer
Perfect.
for a set time or with some conditions.
Okay. Ms. Gales Harris, then we'll
Well, I
entertain a
didn't give a
motion.
second, so
Well, you want to state your, just to defer the annexation, or do we need two separate motions?
Two separate
separate
motions,
motions.
two separate ordinances.
until we get more information.
Now, we're considering the annexation right now.
Right.
Okay.
But, okay, I can't defer both. We just have to do them
We'll
individually.
do them
One at a time.
I understand.
Okay. So have a motion to defer. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Ms. Scales Harris and Mr. Washington. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
No.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll now consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZ24 to zone an area located along Old Fort Parkway, Franklin Road as Highway Commercial CH District simultaneous with annexation.
And then I'd like to make the motion that we defer that also.
Okay.
Second.
Ms. Scales Harris, Mr. Washington. Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
No.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Item 4, consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZR27, amending an area of Indian Hills PUD to be used for a restaurant along South Church Street at Calumet Trace.
Move for passage on second reading.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Washington, Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
No.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZ29, rezoning an area at 448 East Burton Street to Planned Commercial Development PCD District.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Gilly, Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZ30 to rezone an area located along St. Andrews Drive to residential multifamily 16 RM16 district.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. LaLance and Mr. Gilly. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZ31 to rezone an area located at 4107 Manson Pike to commercial fringe CF district.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. LaLance, Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZ32, amending a PRD for Summersby subdivision located along Elam Road to reduce the number of side entry garages.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. LaLance, and Mr. Gilly. Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move to new business. In pursuant to Resolution 14OZ-R28, adopted by the City Council on May 15, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider a PRD amendment and rezoning application for approximately 1.14 acres located along Old Lascassas Highway to be removed from the Stratford Hall PRD and to be owned as a separate PRD. Gary Wisniewski, applicant. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 9, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Good evening. Our first and only public hearing this evening is for you to consider amending the PRD zone for property that is approximately 1.14 acres that is currently a part of the Stratford Hall PRD, Planned Residential District. The property is identified in the orange color on the map before you, and you can see that it is a portion of the Stratford Hall PRD is outlined in black, and this property is in the orange color, and it is to the extreme southwest of that development. The property is currently zoned PRD and is subject to the program book that was approved for Stratford Hall. The request for you is to remove it from the Stratford Hall PRD and zone it as a separate PRD when the program book that will become effective for this property has been provided to you. The properties to the north consist of 4 parcels, and they are currently rental homes. They're zoned RS-15 in that single-family residential district. Property across Old Lascassas Road, which is property fronts, is zoned for single-family purposes, is currently used as duplexes on individual lots, and just behind those duplexes is a large multifamily development which provides housing for MTSU students. And then again, the property that's contiguous to this in Stratford Hall is zoned PRD. The applicants are requesting the PRD to allow 17 units of multifamily development. They're proposing 2 6-unit structures and 1 5-unit structure for a total of 17 dwelling units, which is roughly equivalent to the RM16 zone district. It allows the same density as the RM16 district would. You can see from the program book, however, that they do want to have different setbacks than what would be normally required in the RM16 district, and that's outlined in the program book. They're requesting a 15-foot front, side, and rear setback. This application originally came to the Planning Commission January 8, 2014, and at that time the Planning Commission unanimously recommended deferral to study the matter further. At a later meeting, the Planning Commission, with a split vote, recommended that it be approved. However, in the meantime, the owner, or not the applicant, has been working with the homeowners association and neighbors to see if they can come up with a plan which they could accept a little bit more readily. And the City Council had originally scheduled a public hearing for April 24th, 2014. Mr. Wisniewski wanted to make some additional changes to the plan, which the planning director considered significant enough that it needed to go back to Planning Commission. So that public hearing that was originally scheduled for April 24th was rescheduled for this evening. The applicants went back to the Planning Commission in May to present their plan as amended. The most significant change is that they changed the architectural style, and there's a photograph of what is being proposed in your packet as well. The photograph isn't a very good quality, but I think it does communicate to you that they are requesting a more brownstone type look with a primarily masonry material. Also, during the study of this item, staff had some concerns with the ability of the solid waste to be managed by a private hauler. And so the applicants have come up with an alley-type solution where they think that the site will be able to be circulated so that the solid waste will be able to be served. And I've got a concept plan that's on the screen for you and shows you the outline of the development. The other specifics of the PRD are in the program book, and if you have any questions about them, I'd be glad to answer them. I'm going to invite Mr. Wisniewski to the lectern so he can go through those changes and commitments that he's made and a little bit of the history that has gone on in the past 7 months that they've been working on this project. Again, if you have any questions from me, I'd be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing. That May public hearing that the Planning Commission they did unanimously recommend that you do rezone this property to the new PRD, and there were 6 members present that evening, with Mr. Clark being absent, and all 6 members voted in favor of the item. I'll invite Mr. Wisniewski up at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mayor McFarland, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to present this project before you this evening. This project started quite a while ago when I talked to Mr. Parks about having it rezoned and having it be a townhouse community and not part of the Stratford Hall community as it is now. Our first plan, the architectural styling was very urban, very modern. And the way the original plan was, there were two entrances into it without a cut-through or an alley going through. Also, there wasn't a large enough buffer around the property to protect Stratford Hall. After meetings with the homeowners associations and also meetings with the Planning Commission, we decided to go back and make some changes that would be appealing to both and to go ahead and answer the questions that everyone had. Those questions being the construction entrance into Stratford Hall. As Stratford Hall is right now a planned development, they have private roads, and the concern of the HOA and the concern of the constituents there at Stratford Hall were that the construction traffic would then be cut off from the development into Stratford Hall Section 5 that's currently being built, and all the construction traffic would come through the main entry of Stratford Hall. We've agreed to go ahead and have the construction entrance still maintained through Center Point with a concrete drive that would remain open until the completion of Section 5 of Stratford Hall. Therefore, no construction traffic would be going through Stratford Hall itself. Point number 2 was the drainage, which is always a big issue these days to make sure that stormwater is going to be controlled. This property was already designed by Huddleston Steel to be part of Section 5 Stratford Hall, where all of the drainage would go to the bioretention pond that's currently in Stratford Hall Section 5. Since this is the way the drainage naturally goes and is the only way to go ahead and get water filtration, we've arranged and have drawn up a stormwater maintenance plan and a bioretention agreement between Center Point and also Stratford Hall to go ahead and participate in the long-term maintenance of that area. Those restrictions would be filed with the deed and recorded, so therefore anyone who owned the townhomes at Center Point would be under those same restrictions. That will also be written into the covenants and restrictions for this development. The third point was to make sure we had a decent enough buffer between this development and Stratford Hall. The proposal is to have a rolling berm and an 8-foot tall fence of polyvinyl that could be easily be cleaned and well maintained of 8 foot tall, consisting of 6-foot pickets and 2 foot on top of a lattice work. The one concern that came up from some of the Stratford Hall residents were the windows on the second story of the units that run perpendicular to Aldous Casas Highway. We removed those units upon that request. Item number 5 was the trash pickup that was brought up by former city manager Roger Haley, citing that for the trash to be picked up by a private carrier, the truck would have to pull in, pick up the trash, and back into Aldous Casas Highway, creating a dangerous situation. We definitely agreed and therefore revised the plan to have an alley through the back of this property, so therefore the truck could pull in and drive straight out without having that issue. Number 6 was the architecture, and it was brought up by Mr. Gilly and others that the urban modern probably wasn't a great fit for this area. We decided to go back, redesign the homes to actually be a brownstone look as you have in front of you. The last point was a miscommunication as to if these were going to be rented apartments, and no, they're not. They're going to be single-family townhomes that will be titled fee simple. Therefore, each one can be sold individually as a townhome for folks to live in, similar to the property that we did at Riverbend Park. With respect, I do submit this to you for approval, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions for the applicant?
I got a question. In the new PRD, who's going to own the common areas?
The common area is going to be owned by the HOA. The HOA will have its own set of covenants and restrictions similar to those of Stratford Hall. So therefore, the HOA fees will be paid into that fund, and a private management company will be engaged to manage the property the same as Stratford Hall is.
Thanks. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, one item, Mayor. In item number 3, it says privacy fence and buffer. It looks like you're going to do both as a berm and a privacy fence?
That's correct, Mr. Young. We're going to have a rolling berm on through, which will be permitted probably on a 3-to-1 slope. It will be heavily landscaped according to the Type C buffer detail, and also a fence on top of that berm. So therefore, the total height will probably be around 10 feet with the berm and the fence included.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll get ready to open the public hearing, but a few things. If you'll speak to the city council and keep your comments to the city council and to staff, and then also give your name and address as you come up to the podium. And if you're representing a group, you can speak as long as you would like. If you're an individual, we'd like to try to keep it to 3 minutes, please. All right, we'll open the public hearing.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Ferrone, and I live at 1537 Stratford Hall Circle in Stratford Hall subdivision. The original proposal that was submitted and approved by the city addressed all of Stratford Hall. This is the same concept that was presented to most of the current residents, and we have invested into this planned community. The current proposal seeks to pull a part of the original plan out and change it so the developer can sell 1.14 acres. When some of the current residents in Stratford Hall purchased that property, they brought into a concept that the current proposal ignores for the sake of the developer's interest and at the expense of the residents. If the city council permits this change in the development plan, I would hope that they find that there is a compelling necessity that dictates a change of the plan that contradicts the existing expectations of that development and that of the current residents. Changes when the existing plan is still feasible, to me, is not good land planning. The proposal pulls a small piece of the remaining vacant land for the future development of Stratford Hall into a new development. If this is approved, will the city continue to entertain piecemeal development, ultimately deteriorating the basis of the original plan and approval? I ask the city give careful consideration to the residents who invested in Stratford Hall. I hope the city considers the merit of the existing plan that has made and will continue to make Stratford Hall a cohesive neighborhood, not a series of disjointed housing units that happen to be located next to one another. I would like to add that it's been stressed that this property is all apartments and complex. No, it is not. There's 17 units in Stratford Hall that back up to Old Lescasas Road. I'm one of them. And there's also several private homes in there. I would like to say also that there are a number of people who are not present tonight at this meeting that they feel, some of them feel that this is a done deal. I have to believe that you, the city council, will do what is best for my neighborhood and what is best for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fromm.
My name is Carla Crater. I live at 1906 Scarlett Drive. I'm the closest two-story to the proposed development. Honorable Mayor and members of the council, I appreciate the opportunity to have my concerns heard. Many homeowners within Stratford Hall oppose the removal of this 1.14 acres from our PRD. A couple of the council members are in receipt of some letters from our homeowners, and had I understood the process better, I would have made sure that all of you were in receipt of those letters, and I will do what I can to remedy that situation. There were 19 members of the community that signed letters to have their voices heard, but we learned that as homeowners in Stratford Hall, we had no standing to I apologize. I have an attention deficit problem. Please bear with me for just a moment. We learned at the public hearing for the Planning Commission that we had no standing as a homeowners association to request that this 1.14 acres not be removed from the Stratford Hall PRD. It doesn't change the fact, though, that we are still concerned about having this development abutting the community of Stratford Hall. While these will be fee simple titled units, they are designed as 2 bedrooms. They are described in the program book as a student residential village within walking distance of MTSU for students to live, with a minimum of 34 bedrooms. I believe it's reasonable to expect them over time to be acquired as investments and used as rental properties, and therein lies my concern. We do have rental properties around Stratford Hall right now. They are few. They do cause problems. They interfere with the peaceful enjoyment of our homes. And when 75% of us bought our homes in Stratford Hall, we were not anticipating that we would be living up against a 17-unit townhome community that was targeting a young population, especially not one with dumpsters right over the fence. And we are also concerned about the common area, the recreation area that is available. Again, I'm just concerned about this. I understand from the first conversation, the first item on the agenda tonight, I believe I learned that Stratford Hall would have no remedy or no right to enforce any of the concerns that we had about a lack of enforcement of the covenants and restrictions on that property. We also haven't seen any elevations of the backside that would back up to Stratford Hall. And these are some of the reasons that I would ask you to consider voting against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crater.
Good evening. I'm Claudia Hunter. I live at 1935 Scarlett Drive, which is in Stratford Hall. I am currently the president of the Homeowners Association, and but tonight I'm going to speak as a homeowner and not as the president of the Homeowners Association. In the years that I've lived in Stratford Hall, which is since 2005, there have been many plans for the last section, Section 5, which is abutting this acre that we're talking about tonight. And so the original concept, which was done in 1999, has changed several times by now. And so this plan actually is the best plan that I've seen over all of these years for this area, for the development of Section 5, as well as this 1.14 acres that Mr. Wisniewski is asking to have withdrawn from the PRD. So I ask that you support his request and vote yes. Thank you.
My name is John Crater. I live at 1906 Scarlet Drive, obviously in Stratford Hall. Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you. I guess the issue that I want to talk about backs away a little bit from specifics here. Stratford Hall, as a community, has one of the highest per square foot house values in Murfreesboro. I won't say it's the highest. I don't have privy to that information. But it's a rather unique community. It has been for a long while. What we're seeing here with this development and with other steps up and down Las Casas, excuse me, and around MTSU in general, is that very easily Stratford Hall could become an island surrounded by student housing. That sounds discriminatory almost. What's wrong with student housing? And in most cases you could say nothing. But the population in Stratford Hall are primarily retirement age or in close proximity to it. And there is a significant generational gap between that population and the population of the surrounding student housing. My concern is, if it happens here, is that really your intent? Are you consciously saying we're going to create a gray ghetto inside Stratford Hall surrounded by student housing? Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what you want to do and how this plan is supposed to work out for the overall community in the city. I hope not. I don't think that's the intent. But I can't peer into your hearts or into your minds and know that. I ask that you think a little bit about the ripple effect, the downstream consequences here. Is this the kind of precedent that you really want to set? I hope the answer is no, but ultimately our fate's in your hands. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one else, I'll close the public hearing. And we will consider for passage on first reading ordinance 14OZ28 to amend a PRD at Stratford Hall located along Old Las Casas Highway by removing approximately 1.14 acres and zoning as a separate PRD. And I think the one question that we have was for Ms. Crater. Ms. McGannon will, as far as enforcement of restrictions with this as a PRD.
The conditions of the PRD zoning are such that enforcement would be by the city if there's a violation of any of those conditions. In terms of any restrictive covenants, it depends on how the restrictive covenants are worded in terms of whether or not individual homeowners in Stratford Hall have the ability to enforce such covenants, or whether or not the homeowners association does.
But as far as this plan, it would be the city's responsibility to make sure that it's constructed.
Everything that's in the plan book would be, this is a condition of the zoning, and the city would have the ability to enforce it, because that is zoning as distinct from the covenants.
Okay. Mr. Alliance?
One other question that was brought up was the appearance of the back of the buildings.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Lance. In your plan book, if you turn towards the last few pages, specifically page 16. And you can see a glimpse on page number 14. Not only the back, but the front of the homes also will be of the exact same material that we are currently building at Stratford Hall, which is masonry, fiber cement siding, and 5-pine material. So exactly what these buildings will be constructed on the outside is the same thing we're currently building at Stratford Hall and has been built at Stratford Hall since day one.
It's not like a vinyl siding.
No, it's the term is coined hardy plank, but that's actually a proprietary product. It's fiber cement, which is the same siding that is on most all the homes at Stratford Hall.
Okay.
Mayor.
Mr. Young.
Ms. Ferone, you and I have had some long conversations about this, and I can assure you it's not a done deal. I voted against it in the Planning Commission. But in defense of the applicant, this plan has improved about 300% since the time we saw it on the first.
Could I ask another question?
No, ma'am.
No,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry, but the public hearing's already been closed.
I thought there were not going to be windows for a...
Okay. If you wouldn't mind, we've already closed the public hearing, but I apologize, but Ms. Green, we'll make sure any questions that we can handle that afterwards. I apologize, Mr. Young.
I was just going to say that originally I thought the urban look was completely out of place. The applicant has not only heard my request, but a lot of other people's requests, and came back with the brownstone look, which I think is much more appropriate for this. I think he's pretty well designated or gone down all the lists that we have. He's addressed most everything. One of the comments I wanted to make on the drainage, if this stayed in Stratford Hall, the drainage would not change. It's still going to that same sink area.
That's correct, Mr. Young. The way the drainage for the entire property is, regardless what happens to this 1.16 acres, it's all going to the same bioretention area.
Mr. Gilley.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Wisniewski, I think, Ms. Craig, you've got the elevations now. I was going to ask him to make sure he shared those with you so you'll have those to look at. The other thing, another point that she brought up, page 12, at least on the iPad version of the program book, she's correct. It lists itself as student housing for Landmark Homes of Tennessee. And given the fact of how this project has changed and remodeled itself, so to speak, from where you started with this to where you're now telling them that it is fee simple, brownstone type, I really don't think it's appropriate for it to still have, even if that's just a marketing term that's in there, because it does send a different message than I think than the assurance that we're trying to give to the residents of Stratford Hall. And
Mr.
since
Gilley,
this is a PRD.
I completely agree. I've reviewed this plan book over 25 times within the last week to make sure every single letter was right. The architect out of Orlando, Florida, is the one who's doing the architecture for me, and we told him he needed to change up some of the floor plans. He sent it back on the same form, and you're right. I missed it. This is not going to be student housing. We can write a resolution to that. This is fee simple, for sale townhomes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Gilley, what I will do is make sure he removes the wording, gets the books corrected, and get it back to us. Mark it as the file copy and make sure that the original copy does not have that in there. So I'll follow up with him to make sure it is removed and that we get some correct information.
When we get the correct ones, I know that we will see those, but would you, Ms. Green, get with the neighbors that are here and maybe find a point of contact with their group and make sure that they get that as well?
Sure. If they provide me my contact, I can give it to them.
And as far as the letter is concerned that Ms. Crater had sent to those of us on the Planning Commission, we saw that's public record that was given to us, the Planning Commission. Could you make sure the rest of the council has a copy of that as well? I think Doug and I got it by our role in the Planning Commission, but I think it needs to be seen just so that we all know where they were.
I didn't get it. Mr. Redmond, did you get it? The letter from Mrs. Crater? If you can send it to me, then I can give it to other people.
Okay.
Because I didn't get it.
I thought that
I'll just put it right up.
Okay. That the
And
Planning Commission
when I do get
members all
them,
have
I put them in the file, but I don't have this, so there's nothing in the
Okay.
file.
I think some of us got it as opposed to making its way. Then we'll make sure. Ms. Crater, did you keep a copy of that you could share with, get that to Ms. Green?
I gave her my book.
Okay.
But we can get more. I'm sure Mr. Wisniewski would be glad to give us some after he corrects this wording.
Okay, that's all I needed.
Mr. Gilley, I think we can help with your request. This entire plan book was sent out this week to the HOA president, Ms. Claudia Hunter, and she has distributed that through email to all the residents at Stratford Hall. We'll make sure that when that's corrected...
No. To the board.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misspoke. To the board. We'll make sure that she distributes you to all of the homeowners.
Okay. I think that would be very helpful, because I think there was some confusion early on when we were trying to work through this process about how much information there was amongst the homeowners versus the board itself and that sort of thing. And I'd just like to keep everyone in the loop. I know Ms. Crater and I have talked several times, and she's been very pleasant to talk to with the concerns that she has, as well as a lot of the other neighbors. And I think you're wanting to make sure you're a good neighbor
Absolutely.
to them. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Smotherman.
First, thank you, Toby, for pointing out the student issue in the book. I saw the same thing and had a concern with it. I was at the Homeowners Association meeting a few months back over on Rutherford Boulevard when we had it at the church. I think the then Mayor Tommy Bragg was there, and myself were the representatives from the council. And the plan that we're looking at today is so considerably different from the plan that we looked at that night, because, I'm not going to even repeat the term that somebody referred to the appearance of these apartments originally, or condos, but at the end of the day, they have really came back with a very attractive design. I mean, the brownstone structures look to be very attractive. They've addressed the concern of looking over the fence into people's backyards. They've addressed the separation with the berm and the fencing. The concern that we had at that time with the garbage truck pickup appears to have been addressed. A completely different presentation than what we saw that night, and I'll compliment the developer on the concessions that you've obviously made and the effort that you've made to try and make this as compatible and something that would be attractive and fit into the neighborhood as well. As far as the neighborhood's concerned, the neighborhood was built and MTSU was already in place, so it's kind of difficult to say that MTSU is starting to surround the neighborhood when the reality of it is the neighborhood was built close to MTSU, which was already a very large university at that time. So I'm not sure that the development around it is exactly how everybody would like for it to be, but then again, I think that this is not something that's going to drag it further down. It's something that will help pull it up, because the quality of this proposal is certainly equal to the standard of most of what surrounds you currently, I think. So I appreciate the efforts that were made by the developer and the effort to try and make it as compatible as possible. The water issue that we seem to have had a concern with, no matter what you do, I'm sure water's still going to flow downhill. So, and I don't think there's any addressing that or any changing that. I think that's just a situation that had to be dealt with, and the common retention pond, I think, is certainly a way of addressing it, and that is something that can be controlled as far as the ability to try and control the insect infestation and things that come along with standing water and stuff. So that's something that's controllable, and so.
Okay.
If
I have a quick question.
Are there more questions? Okay.
Hey, Mr. Adlock, this will help me. I have two questions. Gold Valley Drive, the property that backs up to St. Mark's, those are, I guess they have rear entry. Are those townhomes, or is that part of Stratford Hall, or is that a separate area?
No, that's Stratford Place. It's a separate development at this point. And those units do back up to St. Mark's with an alley access, and they are fee simple. Those are separate lots of record.
Okay. And then the other question I have, I've got this pulled up on Google Earth, just looking at it. What south of this, the house that has the big wall around it on the front, what is I can't see what that's zoned.
That's zoned to RS-15.
Okay.
That's the old John T. Cunningham house that's now owned by his son, John W.
Okay. Have you had any contact on that property before?
I've had a lot of contact on that property. Mr. Cunningham is present today. Tonight,
Where
he's
is
sitting
Mr.
here.
Cunningham?
Right there.
Oh, okay.
We actually had a conversation about his property today. We may be seeing an application in the future for it, but I think he's going to reach out to the neighborhoods before he gets very far with that to basically begin to find out what may be acceptable to the neighborhood. So we'll be hearing something about that in the future.
Well, can I ask you?
Yes.
What was originally planned for this piece of property right here?
Which piece?
This piece that we're talking about.
This property was originally part of the Stratford Hall PUD. I think the first iterations of the Stratford Hall had included, I think, 4-unit townhome-type structures. There's a couple of them inside of Stratford Hall, structures like those. There was a couple of, and I'm speaking off the cuff, but that was my recollection.
So it was going to be developed even inside the PRD originally?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And with stormwater regulations, they've had to do some tweaking there in the back and also trying to improve the alley, the way it works for the units.
Okay, any other questions?
Hearing none, I'll move to pass the ordinance.
Second.
Mr. Lance and Mr. Washington. Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Let me say something.
Mr. Gilly?
I'm sorry, Ms. Wright, Mr.
This plan is far different from the first one I saw probably 8 months ago in Bill Huddleston's office with Roger Haley. So that's enough said right there. It's much different, and I consider purchasing one of these, but not there. But this plan has come a long way.
Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll consider for adoption Resolution 14R14, approving the budget of the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department for the fiscal year 2014-2015.
Can you do it without a presentation? A short presentation.
Mr. Gore's already presented his budget. This would
Okay.
be the resolution to adopt that.
Okay.
Move for approval.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. LaLance. Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for adoption Resolution 14R15, approving the budget of the Stormwater Utility Management Fund for the fiscal year 2014-2015.
Move for approval.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Young. Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for adoption Resolution 14R16, approving the budget of the Murfreesboro City Schools for the fiscal year 2014-15, which budget includes the General Purpose Fund, the Extended School Program Fund, the Federal and State Program Funds, the Cafeteria Fund, and the Debt Service Fund.
Move for approval.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. LaLance. Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for adoption Resolution 14R18, amending 2013-2014 budgets for the Murfreesboro City Schools.
Move for adoption.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Young. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for adoption Resolution 14R17 approving the budget of the Evergreen Cemetery for the fiscal year 2014-2015.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Gilly, Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14033, the Appropriations Ordinance.
Move to pass on third and final reading.
Second the motion.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Gilly, Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14034, the Tax Rate Ordinance.
Move to pass on third and final reading.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Young, Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading Ordinance 14035, amending the 2013-2014 budget.
Move to pass on third and final reading.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Gilly, Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider recommendations of the Parks and Recreation Director. Mr. Goodwin.
Mayor and members of the council, good evening. I have three items for your consideration. The first is the bid for the Old Fort Indoor Tennis Complex and a change order. On May the 28th, 2014, we did open bids for the construction of the indoor tennis complex at Old Fort Park. We received 6 bids. The apparent low bidder was Hardcastle Construction Company from Nashville, with a low bid of $6,049,999. In the fiscal impact section, I have outlined the funding for this project, and I've showed you the expenses for this project. As noted in the expenses, there is $467,411 proposed coming from the Stormwater Fund. In the current CIP, it was estimated that we had $320,000 budgeted in stormwater. We would ask that that be amended to reflect the actual cost, and that the allocation in the CIP be increased by $147,411. And I have talked to Mr. Gore, and he says there is funds available if approved. Hardcastle Construction was looked at by Mosun Associates. They did meet all the bid requirements. They are fully licensed. Their references checked out. And as you notice, the low bid exceeded the amount of funding that we have. So administration and I sat down with the engineering company. We asked them to go back to Hardcastle Construction and see if they could do value engineering to get this project into budget. They were able to do that. They're offering a 10% reduction, or $604,999. And after working with Hardcastle, knowing that the scope and the quality of the project is still intact, that they recommend Hardcastle Construction. And they also want to recommend that we accept change order number 1, which would revise the contract total to $5,444,991. So it is a recommendation of the staff and the administration that Hardcastle Construction be approved, and change order number 1, which offers a final contract amount of $5,444,991, and that this be contingent upon legal, and that the mayor be authorized to sign any of the contracts and the change orders. Mayor and council also attached is the letter of recommendation from Mosun Associates with the references for Hardcastle. We've included the change order number 1. If you look at it, you can see the items that was value engineered. And then also, we have included the first 7 pages of the contract. And one of the things I want to point out in that first 7 pages is on page 2, section 3.3. It calls for the dates of completion of this project, and it calls substantial completion for the site and building to be done by 12/31/2014, and for the closeout to be January 30th, 2015. And with that, before I open for questions, Mr. Chris Camp, President of Mosun Associates, is here. He has a short presentation we'd like to give you just to show you what the building looks like at this present time and what it will look like once it's constructed. Mr. Camp?
Mayor and council members, is this image, will it come up? How do we transfer there we go. This is the floor plan for the first floor. The tennis complex has got 4 courts on each side. As MTSU is one of your partners, they're designed to collegiate level, both in terms of lighting and court size. There's a central core on the ground floor, and so this is just the general layout of the courts. It has a two-story, excuse me. I'm not sure how to advance it. Do you know how to advance? There we go. This is the mezzanine space. There is a 5,000 square foot second floor between the courts where spectators will be able to sit during tournaments. You see the lobby entry canopy. You also see canopy on the side of the building. These are the elevations, and I will say that we work very hard with City Manager Lyons and your park staff and others to maintain the integrity of this building. It's a large building, and they wanted to make sure that it fit in the park. And so these images that we're about to show you, this is the site plan for the building. The existing tennis courts are to the right in the image. The new building, new parking lot, you see in the foreground. And this is directly across the street from the existing tennis courts to orientate you in the park. This is an aerial view of what the facility is going to look like. As Mr. Goodwin said, we've used all porous pavers. All the new parking lot is going to be porous with underground storage capacity, so that we actually are reducing the runoff from this. This is the old fairground site, so we're actually taking pavement out as part of this project, as well as rooftops came out. This is a little bit closer in. This is the entry view that you will get as you turn into the parking lot and see the building. Here's another similar view from the opposite side of the parking lot, and it is by your ordinance. It's heavily landscaped. We're introducing a lot of trees into that parking area, if you're familiar with the site, that has no trees in it to speak of at this time. This is the view that you'll have of the building from the existing tennis courts. And that smaller building that you see on the corner is a new restroom to replace the old cinder block restroom that's over in the corner of the park. This is a canopy. When we were working with the tennis association that you have here in Murfreesboro, the one thing they asked us to keep was a covered space because they had been using the old Fairgrounds barn during spring fling and other tournaments as a staging area. So one of the things that we worked hard to keep in the program, even with our value engineering, was this canopy adjacent to the existing tennis courts. And this is the view you would have if you went into the main lobby, paid your fees for court time or talked to the instructor, then you would walk out on an open sidewalk past the new restroom to the tennis courts. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Any questions?
I got maybe a question for Ms. McGann or Mr. Goodwin. Just because I don't understand this. So when the council voted on this to borrow the money, at that point, was there a decision made relative to the annual costs of this, the maintenance, the staffing? I mean, is that already done, or is that just a year-by-year budget item? Or do you have a bigger picture? Was there ever a bigger picture discussion of, are we ready for $500,000 a year or $300, whatever the number is? Is that already incorporated into the decision when you decide to borrow the money, or are we making that decision right now, or is that a year-to-year budget item? Because this is something we don't want to build it and then not fund it, right?
Certainly. When we began the conversations about it, it was really focused on the construction of the facility. While we were going through the process of developing plans for the building, that's when Mr. Goodwin and his team began to research the revenue side of a indoor tennis complex, as well as the expenditure side. He took some site visits, talked to tennis professionals to develop his plan for budget, and that's what was presented to you this spring, and what's included in the budget that you had just adopted in terms of the operating costs.
I think what we're really looking at right now is just the sticks and bricks and the site and development work, and then we've already voted on the budget for the yearly expenditures as well as the capital expenditures that were in our budget sheet. And I think when we talked to Mr. Goodwin and we're asking, Mr. Lance, I think that's right, when we were asking this, that we're hoping that we get it to the point that this is a revenue neutral project. That's
correct, Mayor.
We try to be conservative this year on the revenue side because, again, it's a brand new facility. We're going to have to see how that develops. What I've seen at our sports facilities in Murfreesboro is that not only are they successful, but they're wildly successful. But in this year's budget, we wanted to start on a conservative level, and then time will tell how we do on that revenue side. But we certainly will. That would be one of the chief charges to the tennis professional is bring in play, bring in revenue.
Laney, I'm trying to recall how many employees we saw in the budget this year. I know we saw an increase in Parks and Recreation employees.
There was 4 full-time and 8 part-time. And what we did is we budgeted basically for about 6 months of operation. And we were very conservative, like Mr. Lyons said, on the revenues. Because at that point, we really didn't have a construction schedule. We didn't know when we would get into the building. It looks like now probably it's going to be February. So that's probably good that we were conservative on our revenues. But we really feel like this is going to be a real success. We've had a lot of folks contact us about already scheduling tournaments, not only regionally but nationally. And I know there's been a lot of excitement in the community. MTSU has already scheduled, I think, some tournament as well. So we think it's going to be a successful venue.
Lanny, also on the earlier pictures that I had saw of the facility, it appeared that the facility faced Old Fort Parkway, and now it appears that it...
No, it faces Golf Lane. It's always faced Golf Lane.
Okay. So there's not any signage or anything that will be on the side of the building, or at least I didn't see any there, that would identify this as a tennis facility if you were just driving through town, is there?
That's not the intent. The intent would be on the front for the signage. Of course, we haven't gotten into the sign packages yet. Of course, we have to meet all the sign ordinances, et cetera, Mr. Smotherman. But we'll bring that back to you if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, I guess my concern is I don't want it to look like there's a factory located in our park over there. You
Right.
see this large building over there.
And that was one of the things that we really honed in on. I know Mr. Lyons talked extensively about that. We talked extensively. That's why we insisted on the amount of landscaping they had. We went back and actually changed the architecture to the outside of the building. We tried to make it as soft as you could within the park area and make it fit as well as we possibly could. But you're right, it is a large building.
Okay, any other questions?
Mayor, I move we accept the recommendation of the Parks and Recreation Director in reference to the Old Fort Park tennis court facility.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Gilly. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Mayor and Council, the second item I have is an amendment to Lawson Associates contract for professional services. When we first engaged with Lawson Associates on the construction of this facility, we were operating on a budget basically of $3.2 million. As a result of where we are today, the construction cost, including the work that's already been previously done, which was the demolition of the Ag Center, which we bid through Lawson Associates. The cost is $5,513,491, and Lawson Associates is asking for a budget amendment of $67,400, which would increase their fee from $261,920 to $329,320, which is approximately 6% of the construction cost. And staff and administration has reviewed this request. We feel it's appropriate and in line with the scope of the proposed project, and we do recommend that approve the amount of $67,400, subject to any change or request by our city legal department. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Hearing none, I'd move that we'd approve the suggestion of the Parks and Recreation Director.
Second.
Mr. Smotherman, Ms. Scales, Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Mayor and Council, the third item that I have for you is a revised agreement between the city and Middle Tennessee State University. We did present this agreement on March 13, 2014, but since that time there has been some other funds that has come into Middle Tennessee State University, and they are now changing what the original agreement showed was a maximum contribution of $1.5 million. This agreement shows a contribution of $1.7 million, and it's still for the 20 years. Most of the items that were in that agreement were remaining. There's not very much that changed in there. We made a few tweaks to it, but the one thing that is relevant is the $1.7 million. I know when we proposed the agreement before, they had just a little over $700,000 that they were going to transfer. Right now, they have $1.5 million at the activation of this contract that they'll write a check to the city for. They have another $200,000 in pledges that they'll pay over a period of time. Indications from MTSU that period of time will be short, so we should have money in hand pretty soon. We've shown this agreement to, or worked with Middle Tennessee State University Administration's looked at it, staff's looked at it, Middle Tennessee State University's looked at it. We're all in agreement, so we would recommend that the revised agreement with Middle Tennessee State University and the City of Murfreesboro and the University Foundation be approved.
Okay, you have an agreement with MTSU?
Oh, so moved.
Mr. Young?
Second.
Mr. Gilly? Ms. Wright will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
You're about to call him Mayor Bragg, weren't you?
No, I was waiting to see if he was going to come back.
Aye.
Call you Mayor Reeves.
That's right. We're going old school.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We'll keep you up to date on the progress.
Okay, we're excited. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, yeah, that project, I know that's been, a lot of work has gone into that, and there's many folks to thank. I'm not going to try to name everyone, but certainly the Christy Houston Foundation, Christmas Sorrow, and NTSU have been huge partners in this. When we look at the construction contract that's going to be awarded, clearly we have a lot of financial partners and tennis players who have contributed toward this project, so we're always pleased to bring you projects where we have multiple partners and investors, and this is certainly one of them, so lots of folks to thank.
And I think the good thing, we look at the partnership that we have and that we continue to work with MTSU, but that $1.7 million, there's names and faces of people in this community who've put their money where their mouth is, and they've really stepped up and supported that. And I know we did an event back in I guess it was in the late, early spring that we had all those people there. So we're excited to see it come to fruition. Couldn't come in a better time in February where people want to play tennis when it's cold outside. Mr. Ives, we'll consider recommendations of the Assistant City Attorney with regards to the acquisition of property for reconstruction of Lydell Street.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland, members of council. We're here tonight asking that you approve 2 contracts for the acquisition of 2 parcels of property so that we can proceed with the redesign and reconstruction of Lydell Street, including the Lydell Street West College intersection and then Lydell Street's intersection with Northwest Broad. As you know, the Memorial Bridge project is well underway. There's a lot of dirt being moved. Traffic is being rerouted and moved from time to time. Right now, they're primarily working on utility relocations and beginning preparation for at least one of the ramps. As part of that process, the entrance into the downtown area from Memorial onto West College Street has been closed. And if you could look on page 162 of your electronic agenda, and if they can pull that up on the monitor, that is page 162. Well, anyway, you can see it on your in your agenda packet. This is the preliminary design for the rerouting and reconstruction of Lydell Street. It will result in a traffic circle for the intersection of West College and Lydell Street, and then a T intersection of Lydell Street into Northwest Broad. The existing Lydell Street from College onto Northwest Broad will most likely it'll certainly be closed, most likely abandoned, although the details of that have not yet been worked out. This will provide a signalized access into the downtown area, so it'll be access to the square, pardon me, as well as access to those businesses that are on the west side of the square. Lydell Street will come in approximately midway between Memorial and Main Street, so it will allow for another signalized intersection. It'll allow left turns from people traveling toward the southeast on Broad to come into the square and into the other parts of downtown. The 2 properties that we are proposing to acquire are shown on page 163 of your materials. They're highlighted or covered in blue in that. We actually have contracts signed, subject to council approval, for the acquisition of those two properties. Consistent with our past practices in the acquisition of real estate, we had the parcels appraised, and we prepared an offer of the appraised value plus 10% of the first $200,000 and then 5% of the amounts over $200,000. After some negotiations regarding some other contingencies on this, we have proposed to increase that offer by a total of $6,000, $3,000 per lot, for a total acquisition of both parcels of $803,000. These are commercial properties. They're zoned commercial highway. They are currently occupied by tenants, so they are income-producing properties for the owner. We anticipate some closing costs, including a requirement that we reimburse this landowner for his relocation costs. He also has a business that he conducts off one of the parcels, as well as having tenants, and he has obtained a bid, an estimate I get of $4,400 to move his equipment and inventory materials to a new location. And if we were condemning the property, that would be an element of damages that we would be required to pay. Because this is a transaction in lieu of condemnation, we're proposing that we agree to reimburse the owner for that cost. As I've said, we have contracts signed on this basis. We're subject, of course, to council approval. And the next item on the agenda is a refunding resolution to cover the cost of this from future borrowings or bond issue.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ives? I think several of us have, well, I think everyone has seen this at the TDOT meeting that we had here in the council chambers to see the extension of Lydell Street.
And Mr. Richardson and I agreed that I should present this because this is really a contract issue. If you have project questions, Mr. Richardson is here and be happy to respond about that.
Mr. Ives,
Sir.
I guess going back to the day, the old Frost Top Drive-In property, which was taken down and the existing Lydell Street was built through there, going down to Broad. What will become of that property once this road is relocated where the current road is located at? What will become of that property?
The current roadbed?
Right.
I don't believe there's been any decision on that.
Is it sellable property?
I doubt it. I have not been able yet to find the transaction files wherein the city acquired that right-of-way to construct Lydell Street on into Broad Street. That was before my time by several years.
It was the Frost Top Drive-In, and it was owned by Ray League. So
maybe that'll help. I'll make a note of that.
Mr. Smotherman needs to be a title searcher. Mr. Ives.
The normal result when a road is closed is, if the right-of-way then is abandoned, is that the property is divided, it goes to the two adjoining owners. Now, that assumes, and this is particularly true in country roads where roads were very frequently built on a property line and half of the right-of-way was donated from each of two landowners, and if the road's abandoned, the road goes back to those two landowners. Not knowing who or where exactly this came from at this point, we don't know. And there are a number of utilities that are currently located within that roadway, and I'm not exactly sure at this point what the utility plan will be when the new roadway is completed, and it may be that that property needs to be retained for city purposes. I don't know that, and I don't believe that the planning has got to the stage where there's a recommendation on that.
Yeah, the only remaining piece that was that restaurant is described as 524, I think is what it is on this picture here. And that would have been the rear entrance coming in off of College Street into the little restaurant that was there. But looking at the two lots that adjoin it, it appears to me that the property that we would be giving up would be much greater than the property that those lots currently even are. So, I mean, I assume that it would have some. I'm just trying to recover some of this $800,000 that we're spending over here on these two little blue lots, and it looks like there's quite a bit of land there. So, I would like for us to try and recover some of that $800,000.
Traditionally, roads have been built on right-of-way easements, and the only ownership then that the governmental unit has is to operate it as a roadway. And if the roadway is abandoned, roads closed and that interest is abandoned, then the easement goes away and the government has nothing to sell. Our current property acquisitions, we are endeavoring normally to buy the land in fee simple and actually own title to the land rather than just having a right-of-way easement. That way, if at some point the road is no longer necessary to be, we would have something to sell. I will check further, and certainly if there's something to sell, we will endeavor to do that and report back to you. But my guess would be that there's just an easement, and therefore there would not be anything to sell.
So are you saying that the old owner may own this again?
Well, his successors. It would fall to his successors.
Are there anything? Does that bring up any issues that we need to think about before we vote on this?
Mm-hmm. I don't believe it does. I think we need this property to redo the roadway, and if in fact this property goes to adjoining owners, a substantial portion of it will come to the city that adjoins what's showing as 520 Northwest Broad.
Okay.
It borders that also.
Once you get a little further into getting your due diligence on a title search or figuring out who owns, or can you keep us updated on that as it comes
Certainly
across?
will, yeah. We of course, we do know who owns these adjacent properties.
Right,
we have not yet found, though, the
roadway area.
The acquisition, and it.
Okay.
We've hit a stone wall on that so far. My new information may help me. I'll get Diane on that first thing Monday.
And Ray League's daughter's name is Brenda Robertson, and her husband's name is Dwight Robertson. They live in Milton now, and they're the heirs to the estate of Ray League. Maybe helpful, maybe not.
You said they live in Milton?
I think it's Milton.
All right, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Lance. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll consider for adoption Resolution 14R20 expressing official intent to reimburse for expenditures incurred in connection with certain public works projects and related expenditures for acquisition of property for reconstruction of Lydell Street, plus ordinary closing costs from proceeds of notes, bonds, or other indebtedness to be issued or incurred by the City of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. This is the funding resolution to be able to purchase the property.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Smotherman, Ms. Wright, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Okay, we'll hear from the city attorney with regards to the process for citizen comments, and you have a memo from her in your packet.
Mayor McFarland, members of council, as I indicated in the memo, I tried to look at other jurisdictions' looking at Rutherford County, Memphis, Nashville, Franklin, Brentwood, Hendersonville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville, and tried to outline for you in my memo some of the topics that I thought you might wish to consider and summarize what they do. Some specify who can speak. Some specify what are appropriate subject matter limits. You will have noticed that they were in some conflict. Some required speech to be on a matter on the agenda. Some prohibited speech from being on a matter on the agenda. Some did not require the subject matter to be identified in the course of a sign-up. Others did. Sign-ups were required in some in advance by a number of days, some at time of entry into the legislative chamber. One did the way we talked in school. You put your hand up and you got recognized. There are time limits in some. Those I'm skipping ahead. Some had different priorities in terms of whether or not you were speaking for and against an item. They alternated. So they needed to know subject matters. That really seemed to be more sort of public hearing related than the kind of discussion that the council had expressed interest in having. The time limits varied from 2 to 5, with 3 being the most common. And there were a variety of procedural rules suggesting some general rules of courtesy, but also some appropriateness, that things would not be directed towards personalities, be they members of the legislative body or staff, that they would not be political. The use of technology seemed to vary because of the variety of rules that existed and the fact that these were usually in an agenda, public televised, regular part of the meeting. It was hard to say what would be the most appropriate. My suggestion, after looking at it, would be that you allow persons to sign up by phone or email in advance of the meeting with a name and address, and then as time was available to allow people who had not signed up to speak. And that my suggestion was that you not impose a residency requirement, that you do have a time limit, and a comment that I suggested for adoption that one jurisdiction had was that the speech be in a matter over which the city has some jurisdiction. For example, you wouldn't entertain public comments about federal spending policy or military policy or what the county is doing, but that would be a speech over something which is happening in the city of which the city government has some jurisdiction, and that you have some general standards for appropriate conduct, with the prospect that you might need to adopt more detailed rules as you get experience with who wishes to come to speak to you and on what topics. But obviously those were just my suggestions, and there isn't law, so to speak, that goes with that. You may recall from our last discussion that there were different points of view in terms of when this should be set for, as to whether or not it should be automatically scheduled for the first Monday of the month, which would make it easier for the Open Meeting Act notice, although there may be some problems when occasionally a holiday will fall and we will not have a council meeting in the first Thursday of the month, or having a set schedule. Perhaps we could schedule 6 months out so that we could identify that for public meeting purposes, or to, there are options there, but I think Ms. Machado would think it ill of me if we did not point out that issue might also warrant discussion at this time, and the expectation that, as we said last time, the first comment special meeting would be on the 10th of July upcoming.
Let's handle, I think we've already advertised the meeting for July 10th, so we really can't change anything on that one, but we can talk about the date first. Does anyone have any recommendations of what you'd like to see on the date, first of the month? Would that first meeting of the month, unless it's a holiday? Is that, I think, what we talked about?
Just first meeting of
First
the month.
meeting of
First
the month.
meeting of the month,
Okay.
regardless whether we miss a scheduled meeting, either second week, depending on just when we're here.
We advertise for the whole month at the end of the month before. So I won't know at the end of the month before when the first meeting's going to be if we want to skip a week other than for a holiday.
Okay.
Well, this isn't something we have to advertise for, though, is it? Yeah. It is?
Yes.
My suggestion might be that, we do plan around the first meeting of the month, looking at the holidays. The decision about whether council meets or not really, comes down to looking at how much business may be present, and, maybe for a 6-month period, we'll just plan to always meet the Thursday that's not a week of a holiday for that month. This way, it can be put into the advertisement, it can be predictable.
I think that's
We may have a short council,
idea.
we may have a short council meeting, but I think the important part will be that it's knowable and predictable.
Sure. I think that's fine.
No.
And I think that is something for the residents to understand that, if we don't have business to discuss, if from a small business owner, you look at how many people that we have here and how many people that we're paying to be here, that we don't want to spend unnecessary money with people who are paid staff when we don't have anything to talk about.
What if we did the first meeting that was a public hearing?
Well, we talked about that. The only thing is those dates change. And I think what we were trying to find is some way to have consistency where people knew it's the first meeting of the month.
Yeah.
And that,
That's the simplest way to do it.
we'll have a holiday that will pop up, but we'll know that on the front end that we can say, okay, for the month of July, it's the second meeting of the month, or however that goes. Okay. Do you need a motion on the date, or?
No, you've
Okay.
given direction to staff,
Okay.
and we'll just come back to you with that list
Okay.
for 6-month period, and, then we'll act accordingly.
Okay.
Ms. McGannon, I think you left it kind of open to us as the amount of time that we would allow people to speak, and you made the suggestion that it might vary from 2 minutes to 5 minutes, and I would suggest 3 minutes.
3
That's-
seemed to be the most common period. It was Memphis that had 2. They're a much larger community, so I was just trying to summarize what others had. 3 was the most common.
Ms. McGannon, you put a lot of work into this, and we appreciate it. But at the very end of the memo, there were some suggestions about allowing residents to email and also call in. Is that acceptable to everyone? And then I guess the third step would be that still wouldn't preclude anyone being able to speak. But if you took the time to email and call in, that you would have
Priority
first
on the
priority
list.
to be able to speak.
Who would you call in to? Who are you making that call to?
I hadn't specified. We certainly always have staff in both the city recorder and the mayor's office, and you could, give priority if you wanted to people emailed to sort of encourage, electronically have those have first call, so to speak, because that would minimize staff effort in terms of being responsive to calls. I did not discuss that aspect of my memo with either Mr. Lyons or Ms. Wright, and they may wish to comment. They may have a preference.
I think let's maybe ask the public to email the mayor, and then we'll get the list pushed out to everybody else. And we'll, whatever you all decide, this will be something that we'll put on the city website, on our Facebook page, get Channel 3 to do a story. We certainly want to help broadcast that.
But we may want to have a phone number in case people don't have easy email, and so the question would...
I think the phone number would be the 849-2629, the city manager's office, and that would be Ms. Tigg. Would
I
be
can get
there,
Ms. Tigg to get the email. We'll
Sure.
publicize Ms. Tigg's email address and the office phone number, and then she'll get those and she'll distribute it to council, and we'll coordinate it that way.
Would that be acceptable to everyone?
That's a good idea.
Okay. So, Ms. McGannon, will you bring this back to us with a more formal, do we need to
If the council likes my suggestion, I I certainly can bring it back more formal. You maybe other things you want to add, or you can, and just as you know, as the
Sure.
chair, you sort of have flexibility there.
Yeah, I hear that I think we're fine, and I think it's going to be a working process, that we may see things that we'll need to improve as we go along, and I hope that 30 minutes is not enough. I hope that we have enough people that want to come and speak. It's not enough, but okay. All right, we'll move over to beer permits. Ms. Wright?
Mayor, I have one tonight. This is a little bit out of the ordinary from what I normally bring. I am not bringing a recommendation to approve it or not approve it. This particular applicant has a domestic assault charge in the background check. And they had been advised that they should be here, and I have not seen them in the audience in case you had questions or they wanted to speak to you regarding any questions you may have. When we have a beer application, one of the things they have to attest to is whether or not they have sold beer against state or city codes or transported beer. It's all alcohol related. There's also a question about, have you been charged with a crime of moral turpitude? Moral turpitude has not been defined in such a way that it's easy to say what qualifies. So I discussed this with the city attorney, and it was decided to bring this to you to let you decide. And if you have questions for Ms. McGannon, I think she's prepared for that. Otherwise, this applicant does have a ticket that has not been paid and has been notified that if it's approved, we would expect that ticket to get paid before a permit would be issued. We have not gotten the codes inspections back yet. I think there was some hesitancy to proceed with that without knowing how you would feel about the background check.
I would say, based on the background check and the outstanding debts due for fines, that we would decline this beer application at this time. And that's in the form of a motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. You have a list of statements that are on the desk. Do we have a motion to pay the bills?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. You have a lengthy stack, and I won't go through and read all of those. Ms. McGannon's frowning at me, so as I was saying, I will go through and read all of those. I'm going to recommend, because these, Ms. McGannon, though, these are not for actual appointment tonight. This is just for information for the council for the next meeting.
He doesn't need to read them until we're actually on the vote.
Correct.
So you have a list of appointments that will be for the next council meeting, and this is for our month of June appointments. So if you have any questions, please send those to the city manager as far as the appointments. Do we have any other business from staff or city council?
I'd like to ask Ms. McGannon a question concerning something that we currently have in our city's laws that restricts the ability for people with handgun permits to carry firearms into our parks. And I'm somewhat concerned with the expansion and growth of our greenway system and there being such isolated areas. Is there any option or any way the city could amend that so that it would prohibit it from city parks with the exception of on the greenway system?
I'd want to look at the law before I gave you an opinion about that.
Okay. If you would, please get back with us and let us know an opinion on what we might be able to do to address that concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Council members, I don't see anything else, but would say our July 4th celebration will be this upcoming Friday, and our celebration under the stars, I think, starts at Mr. Gillen. Okay. Okay. So fireworks start at 8 o'clock. Fireworks start at 9. City Symphony starts at 8, and the family games start at 5. All right. So everyone have a happy 4th. Thank you, and we stand adjourned.